We heard from Sonny Dykes earlier this week at Media Days, but what did the players have to say? Namdi Obiazor with a really shocking admission about how different Andy Avalos' defense is and how it's going to help TCU this year. That's coming up next here on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. We're available on YouTube, also wherever it is you get your podcast. Hope you're enjoying your Friday or maybe the weekend if you're listening to this on Saturday or Sunday. Appreciate you hopping on and listening or watching the show. Big 12 Media Days has come and gone. It was in Las Vegas this year. And we heard from Sonny Dykes earlier this week. The main thing that kind of came out of that, Josh Hoover appears to be quarterback one, and he is healthy for the upcoming season. We also heard from some players, Namdi Obiazor, Mike Nichols, and Namdi said something really fascinating to Jamie Plunkett from Horned Frog Blitz, the 247 affiliate, at Media Days earlier this week, when he was talking about the main difference with Andy Avalos coming over as the new defensive coordinator and running a totally different scheme. Sonny Dykes talked earlier this week about how they're moving from that 3-down lineman set to, more 4 and 5 down fronts. It's going to give them some flexibility. They're going to have some guys on the edge that are really more athletes than your prototypical kind of big body defensive linemen that they were recruiting in the past. And Namdi mentioned that the biggest difference to him between what they were doing under Joe Gillespie and what they're doing now is there's going to be specific game plans and a lot of different looks when it comes to week different teams. Like they're going to adjust the defense to what offenses do well. And I guess in the previous defense under Joe Gillespie, they were really in their base sets pretty much all the time, which that's pretty wild to hear. I mean, I guess it's not surprising when you think about it because it was very obvious from the Colorado game on. It felt like teams knew exactly how to attack the TCU defense. And there was a lack of pressure on the quarterback that allowed the QB to kind of stay in the pocket, dissect the defense, make throws. And if he could make those throws and be accurate and be on time, then in most cases, the offense was going to be really successful. But the idea that TCU wasn't really adjusting, I mean, I'm sure there were game plans week to week, but that they weren't really adjusting the defense much depending on the opponent is just crazy to me. But, I mean, it makes sense. There were so many games last year, whether it was Oklahoma, Kansas State, Colorado, where the defense just looked completely overwhelmed. And it seemed like they had no idea what they were doing and what the other offense was trying to accomplish and just didn't have any idea how to stop it. So I'm super optimistic about what this new scheme can bring to the table from a pass rushing standpoint and just hopefully confusing offenses. Now, I think the flip side of that is if you're taking some more risk and if you're trying to throw a lot of different looks at offenses, with it being year one, there's probably going to be some growing pains. You're going to give some splash plays. You have some big plays. But if the trade-off is that you can cause some turnovers, stop some drives by getting some negative plays forced on first and second down, one of the big glaring issues last year was the defense in its most basic sense was built on the idea of, well, hey, let's just keep everything in front of us. Let's force offenses to go on long, methodical drives where they have to execute play after play. And if they can't do that, then the drive's eventually going to stall out. And they didn't do a good job of that this past season. And they were still giving up big plays. And I defended Joe Gillespie for a while last year, mainly for the simple fact that I was just like, man, I don't believe that this guy just forgot how to coach. Not that the defense was amazing in year one, but they were competent and they did a serviceable job and they had a knack of making plays and making stops when they had to. But as the year went on, it became more and more evident that something has to change here. And to Sonny's credit, he made that move. And now you still have to execute. But I love the idea of just throwing different concepts, coverages, pass rushers at quarterbacks, at offenses, and trying to force and create some big plays on the defensive side of the football. Another guy that Namdi mentioned was Caleb Alonzor, who is the transfer from Cal. He was Cal's leading tackler last year. And it was a big deal when he committed. And then I think, as things typically do with the news cycle, sort of lost sight of it. But one major issue last year, it seemed like towards the end of the season a couple of years ago, and then through the entirety of last season, teams had really picked up on the fact that TCU's linebackers weren't super athletic. I mean, you got some good players there, but Jamoy Hodge, Johnny Hodges, they struggled to cover guys in space, and there was a very concerted effort to isolate, linebackers and safeties in one-on-one situations and force them to cover and make plays, and it didn't work very well for TCU. So I think with Alarmzor, with Shad Banks, with Namdi coming back, you have some pieces where you got some flexibility. You'll also have a kind of stud linebacker that you can do some different things with as well. And so hopefully that will mitigate some of those issues that they had this past season. But overall, really good thoughts about the defense. And Mike Nichols, who was also at Media Days, offensive tackle for the Frogs. I think he'll probably be on the other side of Bless Harris as a starter when the season ramps up against Stanford here in a couple months. He followed up on that and said that one kind of refreshing change of pace during spring camp was the offensive line kind of got thrown in the fire with all the different looks and sets and fronts that the TCU defense was throwing at them during practice. So it's going to help them get better, right? Like that good on good scrimmaging that's happening on a day-to-day basis, and that will continue through fall camp. That should expedite the process of, hey, we have to communicate as an O-line. Like we have to know our responsibilities. We have to call it out. We have to talk and just get right to the point, because guys are going to be coming from all over the place. And if you don't know what you're doing, who you're blocking, and I don't know what the guy next to me is doing, this is not going to work. And last season, I do feel like the O-line kind of came together as the year went on. He also told Jamie Plunkett from Horned Frog Blitz that the process so far has been pretty smooth as far as getting everybody on the same page, getting everybody integrated, understanding the offense. But there's going to be some growing pains to this. I do feel like they've got more talent up front. And if you can find the right five guys and mix and match those different positions, then that's going to be a huge key for what this offense is going to do. And I think it's a big year for everybody on the coaching staff. AJ Ricker, it felt like last year during fall camp, they were moving guys around, kind of tweaking the lineup, so to speak. And at the time, optimistically, the narrative was sort of like, well, they're just trying to find the right people, and this takes time, and they're hopefully going to have guys that can play multiple positions. So if there's an injury, you don't really skip a beat because you just plug this player in there and they get after it, right? And I feel like as the season started, we realized the reality was they just weren't super confident that they had five guys who could get the job done. And so that's why they were moving Brandon Coleman around, because he was sort of a stopgap, and he was the bubble gum and duct tape that was trying to hold that thing together. He dealt with some injuries. They had to throw a true freshman in there and Ben Taylor Whitfield. So I believe the depth is better this year, but you've got to find those guys that can start and can play at a high level. And Sonny said this in the 365 Sports interview that he did at Media Days. And I was surprised to hear him say this, because I jokingly mentioned last week, I was like, I don't think he'll say that this is the most talented team he's ever had again, because he said that last year, and then maybe it was, but it didn't translate on the field. He did say that he thought this was the deepest team he ever had. And hey, I'll believe him, because he knows what he's saying, and he wasn't really prompted to say that. It just kind of came organically from him. But he mentioned that competition is a great thing. And I do agree with him on this. He said in 2022, in that great run they had, they were super fortunate that they just stayed healthy. That wasn't a super deep team, but they had talent. Their starters were super talented. They had a great attitude. They came together. They played really well together. And they were fortunate that they were able to stay healthy. And up front, that was a huge key. All 5 of their offensive linemen started every game. And so even guys like Wes Harris, who had a history of missing time and having injuries, he was healthy all year long. Alan Ali, who came over from SMU, he was healthy all year long. Coker and Coleman, healthy all year long. Steve Avila was in every game. So that was a big, fortunate part of that run. And now they feel like on the depth chart, they have more pieces so that if somebody does go down, they can kind of work with that. But if everyone stays healthy, that's obviously a huge plus too. So we'll see how that plays out once the season starts and the pads start popping and all that. When we come back, the Big 12, realignment's been kind of quiet lately, but Brett Yormark, is he trying to make something happen again? He's always got it moving and shaking. That's coming up next here on Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team every day. All right, eBay Motors. I'm not ashamed to say it. I'm not super knowledgeable about car maintenance, about fixing vehicles. So eBay Motors has been a godsend for me because they have the eBay Guaranteed Fit program where you can put the make and model of your car in their system, choose a part, put it in your cart, and they will tell you automatically, yes, that's the right part for your vehicle, or no, you need to keep looking and find something else. eBay Motors, they make it super easy for you. You can't play around with your ride. It gets you everywhere. So whether you're looking to level it up or just maintain it at peak performance, they have everything from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. Over 122 million parts for your car. You always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. All the parts you need at the prices you want. It's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. That eBay Guaranteed Fit program is only available to U.S. customers. So one underrated thing about the Media Day season that I didn't really think about being a reality, but I saw people covering it and I was like, oh man, they're really doing this. So the Pac-12 has disbanded essentially, right? But there are still 2 teams that are technically part of the Pac-12 conference, Washington State and Oregon State. And I feel bad for their fan bases because these are passionate fan bases. Obviously, they didn't do anything wrong. They just kind of got lost in the shuffle of realignment. And, I mean, TCU was living in that world temporarily. Thankfully, Brett Yormark in and was very proactive about getting the job done. And also, I think TCU just has a really good brand nationally and a good market in DFW. But Oregon State and Washington State held their own media days. So just those 2 programs at kind of zombie Pac-12 media days, if you want to call it that. And it reminded me of, I mean, just a little over a year ago, we were at Big 12 media days in Arlington, and Brett Yormark was talking about how the league was open for business, and he was very confident. And then a few days later, you hear the news that Colorado is going to make the jump. Not too long after, Oregon and Washington decided to go to the Big 10, and the Big 12 picks up a few other Pac-12 schools. And that was it. That was the demise of the league. And since then, things have been pretty quiet. You know, there's been some rumors here and there, but for the most part, it seems like the SEC at least is kind of staying pat. They like where they're at. The Big 10 still kind of has some irons in the fire, but I think both regionally and from an academic standpoint, they've got some qualifications and some things that they're not really willing to budge on. So that sort of limits them. And then the ACC, Florida State has been publicly trying to break up with that conference for about a year now. Jim Phillips, the ACC commissioner, locked the ACC into a long-term TV deal that sounded really good at the time, but now they don't have any ability to change or make more money until 2036. And the ACC network is involved, and there are schools that are restless, right? And Clemson is also the other sort of blue blood in the conversation with Florida State that is apparently not happy with that TV deal and with how the ACC has sort of tried to market themselves in this ever-changing world of college sports. So the first thought is, well, those two schools would make sense in the Big Ten or SEC. Would those conferences be interested? But as I said earlier, SEC seems like they're kind of done, at least for the moment. Big Ten has some pretty specific requirements on the types of schools they want. And so, according to Ross Dellinger, who is a national reporter for Yahoo Sports and has covered college sports for a long time, has done a really good job through this shifting of tides over the past few years of having scoops, knowing what was going on. He was talking to John Kurtz, who covers Kansas State at Big 12 Media Days, and he says that Florida State and Clemson have at least had preliminary discussions with the Big 12. Now, it doesn't mean that there's a deal in place or anything, but communication has happened. And both sides at least know, like, hey, there's some interest here. Now, my guess is, and Ross Dellinger said this, Florida State and Clemson's first idea and thought and option would be, let's get into one of the power two, so to speak, of the Big Ten or the SEC. And Ross mentioned that if they can't do that, actually their second option would be maybe some way to reform the ACC deal with financial advantages for themselves. So maybe you do some revenue sharing that's not across the board, but that is on a sliding scale based on the teams themselves, where Florida State and Clemson could get a larger piece of the pie. And then after that, another option would be joining another conference. And Dellinger said that's option 3. And there's only one other power league, and that's the Big 12. And you look at these options again, they'd probably prefer option 1, which would be getting into the Big Ten or SEC. But I don't know that's going to happen because the SEC already has schools in the states already, in Florida State and South Carolina. And the Big Ten, I don't know how interested they are in coming south. I mean, these things might happen. So he puts a little carrot out there that, listen, it's a possibility, right? Now, the thing that I've always loved about Brett Yormark since he took over is he's just been super proactive. And he's been on the cutting edge of whether it's trying to now get private equity involved in the Big 12, selling the naming rights. And I know some fans kind of cringe when they hear that. But we're moving towards a world where there's probably going to be advertisements on jerseys and all kinds of crazy things happening. But he's always looking for ways to make more money and to close the gap between the Big 12 and the SEC and Big 10. So that, okay, let's turn over every rock we can and find out if there's a way for us to maximize our value so that if we don't catch up to these conferences with TV deals, which it doesn't look like they will, then we can at least, shrink the gap with all these different things that we're dipping our toes in and we're involved in. I think the chances would be pretty low of this happening. But the fact that there's at least discussions happening gives me optimism that the league still gets it, that he still understands kind of what's at stake here. And Sonny said this kind of in an offhand way during one of his interviews at Media Days. I think it was with 365 Sports guys. He was like, look, we're living in a world now where by October, there might only be 3 major conferences. And I assume he was alluding to these rumors that the ACC could implode. Surviving the Pac-12 implosion was one thing. Like, that was a good deal for the Big 12. But I always saw those conferences as pretty similar. And honestly, like, West Coast elitism was the only thing that sort of didn't work in the Big 12's favor. Like, the Pac-12 people thought they were better than Big 12 people. And the Big 12 maneuvered correctly in those business dealings and survived. The ACC, that's a historic conference. And if the Big 12 can survive that and watch the ACC crumble, then that would be a massive win. And that would not be a win that I would have predicted even like 6 months ago necessarily. So, man, I'm impressed with his ability to keep trying to make these things happen. Doesn't mean it's going to, but he's at least active in saying, hey, we got to keep our foot on the gas pedal here and continue to find ways to be on the cutting edge of this. When we come back, we'll get some audience reaction. It's Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team. We do it here every day. FanDuel, sports might be winding down, but we still got baseball every day. We're about to hit the All-Star break, but there's new deals, boost, bonuses daily on the FanDuel app right now. That's right. All summer long, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus on a daily basis. You love sports. You want to be involved with it year-round. Perfect time to join. You can go to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app. All customers, daily bonuses. Perfect time to say, okay, I don't know much about this world. Why don't I give it a test run here during Major League Baseball season and see if I can get my feet under me before the craziness of football starts. FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. FanDuel is the official betting partner of Major League Baseball and a proud sponsor of the Locked On Network. FanDuel, give it a try today. Before we go, I talked on, I guess it was Wednesday, about Josh Hoover and his health status. Richard Berry said one of the things that Sonny mentioned from this is in a YouTube comment, from his 365 interview, was that he was simply putting out that it's not as easy for them as for the Blue Bloods. Well, that's the case. I don't think complaining is the answer. And then he said, lastly, as great as the 22 run was, it's time to move on and focus on the future with a great 2025 class and beyond. Yeah, it's definitely time to focus on the future. I bring up that season a lot, but it's really just because we're kind of in the middle of the offseason now, and I think this is a big year and sort of showing what this team and program can be moving forward under Sonny Dykes. And I'm not exactly sure the comment that you're referring to, but yeah, it is harder. It's going to be harder for TCU than it is for some of the other Blue Bloods. But I think there's a lot of room for them to continue to grow NIL and be super competitive in this new world of college football. And I believe when and if this happens, when it kind of moves to the schools doing things on their own, that's going to benefit TCU a lot and give them a huge advantage in this recruiting space, in this recruiting world. And then Rusty said, beside all this you're talking about, do you think we get any more recruits soon? I love that. I love that you're like, hey, I want to know something else besides everything you're talking about right now. My guess is the 2025 class is pretty set. I don't think they're done, but I feel like this is the last we'll hear about new commits for a little while. We're in a dead period right now. I think once the season starts and visits become a thing again, then you'll get some more movement on that front. But man, they've got a lot of commits. I mean, they really did a lot of work in the month of June, and even with the Ty Hawkins decommitment, I'm trying to see exactly how many guys they have committed at the moment. 21 commits right now. So, yeah, I mean, I think you're probably talking about they'll add maybe 3 or 4 more guys before it's all said and done, possibly a few more if they want this to be a bigger class. But I think they've done a really good job this summer, and that's probably the last we'll hear of new commits for a few weeks at least. But that's just kind of a guess on my part. So recruiting is a year-round thing. There's always a chance that guys that visit early in the summer could just say, hey, I want to make a decision right now and not wait until football season. But we'll see how that plays out. We'll be back on Monday. It's Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team. We made it through media days. We're closer to football season. We do it here every day.